Cold open when the gods abandoned Akkad. There was a city whose kings claimed to rule the four corners of the world. Its armies crossed mountains. Its officials governed lands from the Persian Gulf toward the Mediterranean. Its language traveled farther than its soldiers, carried in clay tablets, royal inscriptions, contracts, prayers, and commands. The city was called Akkad. And then it disappeared. No archaeologist has identified its ruins with certainty. No surviving map reveals its streets. We know Akkad through the words of kings, the memories of later civilizations, and the traces of an empire that changed Mesopotamia forever. More than 4,000 years ago, one ruler broke the old political order of independent cities and created something larger. His name was Sargon. Later generations remembered him as a conqueror, a lawgiver, a man of mysterious birth, and the model against which ambitious kings measured themselves. His heirs inherited an empire held together by victory, administration, ritual, and fear. Under his grandson Naram-Sin, royal power reached astonishing heights. The king placed the sign of divinity before his own name. Artists showed him climbing a mountain above his enemies, crowned with horns beneath the stars. Yet at the summit of Akkadian power, the first fractures were already visible. Rebellions spread. Rivals attacked the frontiers. Trade routes became harder to defend. The climate may have turned drier. Fields and pastures suffered. The political system that had concentrated glory in one dynasty also concentrated danger. When the center weakened, distant lands and ancient cities began to pull away. Later poets said the empire fell because a king had offended the god Enlil and brought a curse upon Akkad. History suggests something more complicated, not one blow, but many pressures arriving together. This is the story of the rise and fall of the Akkadian Empire, often called the first territorial empire in recorded history, and of the people who imagined that one king might rule the whole known world. Before the empire. To understand Akkad, we must begin with the landscape that made it possible. Mesopotamia means the land between rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates, flowing southeast toward the Persian Gulf. In the south, these rivers crossed an open alluvial plain. Rainfall was unreliable, but the soil could be extraordinarily productive when water was directed through canals. This was not a land where political life emerged naturally from defensible mountains or isolated valleys. It was open country. Water crossed boundaries. A canal dug by one community could affect the fields of another. Silt had to be cleared. Banks had to be repaired. Labor had to be organized. Grain had to be measured, stored, and distributed. Over centuries, settlements expanded into cities. By the middle of the 3rd millennium BCE, southern Mesopotamia contained a dense network of urban states. Uruk, Lagash, Umma, Adab, and others possessed temples, rulers, workshops, fields, herds, and military forces. Modern people sometimes speak of the Sumerians as though they formed a single country. They did not. Their cities shared cultural traditions and a written language, but they were politically divided. Each city honored its divine patrons and defended its own interests. Kings fought over farmland, canals, tribute, and prestige. Farther north, especially around Kish and the region that later sources associated with Akkad, many people spoke Semitic dialects ancestral to the Akkadian language. Sumerian and Akkadian speakers had lived beside one another for generations. Their worlds overlapped. Their gods, names, artistic traditions, and institutions influenced one another. The rise of the Akkadian dynasty was therefore not a simple invasion of one people by another. Sargon emerged from within a connected Mesopotamian world, diverse in language, divided in politics, but bound together by trade, religion, and competition. Writing had already transformed this world. Scribes pressed reed styluses into damp clay, recording deliveries of barley, allocations of wool, lists of workers, transfers of land, hymns, treaties, and royal victories. Most tablets concerned administration rather than epic events. Yet together, they reveal a society capable of organizing resources on a remarkable scale. Mesopotamia was rich in grain, dates, wool, livestock, and human skill. But the southern plain lacked many materials desired by elites and craftspeople. Timber, hard stone, silver, copper, and tin came through long-distance exchange. Boats and caravans connected the cities with the Gulf, the Iranian Plateau, northern Mesopotamia, Syria, and Anatolia. Control of these networks brought wealth. It also brought conflict. In the generations before Sargon, rulers attempted to build wider coalitions and dominate their neighbors. Among the most successful was Lugal-Zagizi, ruler of Amma and later Uruk. His inscriptions celebrated authority across Sumer and access from the Lower Sea, probably the Persian Gulf, to the Upper Sea, the Mediterranean. The claim was grander than the political reality. Lugal-Zagizi had defeated several rivals, but Mesopotamia was not securely unified. The cities had not forgotten their independence. His coalition depended on force, loyalty, and continuing success. Somewhere in this turbulent landscape stood the city of Akkad, also called Agade in many modern translations. Its precise location remains one of archaeology's enduring mysteries. It may have stood in northern Babylonia, perhaps not far from Kish, but no excavated site has been accepted as the lost capital. The absence of the city is strangely appropriate. Akkad survives less as a place than as an idea, the center of a new kind of power. And that idea would be attached to a man whose own beginnings were transformed into legend. Sargon, the man of legend. Centuries after Sargon's death, scribes copied a story about his birth. In this later legend, Sargon says that his mother was a high priestess and that he did not know his father. She gave birth to him in secret, placed him in a basket of reeds, sealed it with bitumen, and set him upon a river. The water carried the child to a man named Akki, a drawer of water, who raised him as his son. The resemblance to other ancient stories of exposed infants is unmistakable. It is also impossible to treat the tale as a contemporary biography. The surviving versions were written long after Sargon lived. What the story tells us with confidence is not how Sargon was born, but how later Mesopotamians wanted to remember him, a man without an obvious royal inheritance, chosen by destiny and carried upward by divine favor. Sargon's throne name is often interpreted as "the king is legitimate." That name may itself hint at political anxiety. A ruler born into an unquestioned dynasty rarely needs to announce his legitimacy so directly. Later tradition made Sargon a cupbearer to Uarzababa, king of Kish. The title sounds humble to modern ears, but a royal cupbearer was a trusted court official with close access to the king. Whether every detail is true cannot be established. Still, Sargon probably rose through the political and military structures of northern Mesopotamia before seizing power. His decisive opponent was Lugal-Zagizi. A later account attributed to Sargon declares that he defeated Lugal-Zagizi, captured him, and brought him in a neck stock to the gate of the god in Lilith-Nippur. The image is both political and religious. Sargon was not merely humiliating a rival. He was presenting the defeated king before the sacred center whose approval mattered throughout Sumer. Sargon's inscriptions associate him with victories over Uruk, Uar, Lagash, Amma, and other southern cities. The exact sequence is uncertain, and royal inscriptions are never neutral records. They select events to magnify the ruler. But the result is clear: Sargon overcame the political order that had existed before him. He did not simply become another king among kings. He constructed a dynasty whose authority reached across many cities and regions. The achievement required more than battlefield success. A conqueror can raid a city and leave. An emperor must make victory endure. Sargon placed loyal officials in strategic positions. Members of his family received powerful religious roles. Garrisons and representatives connected the court to conquered territories. Local institutions did not vanish, but they operated beneath a new imperial hierarchy. The capital of Akkad became the symbol of this order. Its warehouses received wealth from many regions. Its workshops and temples displayed the dynasty's power. Its name became inseparable from the language of its rulers. The city's missing location prevents us from reconstructing it in detail. We should resist imagining later Babylon or Nineveh and placing it 4 centuries too early. Akkad was probably a major mudbrick city shaped by canals, courtyards, workshops, temples, administrative buildings, and crowded residential quarters. Its real monument was the network it commanded. Sargon used titles that expressed authority on different scales. King of Kish carried an old prestige that could mean more than rule over one city. King of Akkad tied his dynasty to its new center. Later traditions turned him into a universal conqueror. Claims that Sargon's armies reached every place named in later literature should be handled carefully. Yet Akkadian influence did extend far beyond southern Mesopotamia. Campaigns and political relationships reached into northern Mesopotamia, Syria, and lands toward Elam in the east. Royal inscriptions evoked the upper and lower seas, transforming geography into an argument about universal rule. For soldiers, these campaigns meant exhausting marches, uncertain supplies, and violent assaults. For officials, they meant counting grain, managing labor, sending messages, and protecting routes. For conquered communities, empire could mean tribute, new governors, military presence, and the loss of political independence. For the court, it meant unprecedented resources. But Sargon understood that conquest alone could not bind Sumer and Akkad. The dynasty also needed the gods. Enheduanna and the politics of the sacred. Sargon appointed his daughter Enheduanna as high priestess of the moon god Nanna at Ur. This act united politics and religion with extraordinary precision. Ur was one of southern Mesopotamia's most important cities. The high priestess held immense ritual prestige. By placing a royal daughter in that office, Sargon connected his northern dynasty to a revered Sumerian cult. Enheduanna is also celebrated as the earliest author in world history known by name. Works associated with her include hymns to temples and a powerful composition often called the Exaltation of Inanna. The textual history is complex, surviving manuscripts or later copies, and scholars debate aspects of authorship and transmission. Even with those cautions, Enheduanna's literary identity mattered deeply to Mesopotamian scribes. Her voice does not sound like a decorative appendage to imperial politics. It is forceful, personal, and theologically ambitious. In one remembered crisis, Enheduanna was expelled from her position during rebellion. Her composition appeals to the goddess Inanna, describing humiliation and seeking restoration. The political order is presented not only as the will of a royal family but as part of a divine relationship. Through Enheduanna, the dynasty helped connect the Sumerian goddess Inanna with the Akkadian Ishtar, reinforcing cultural integration without erasing difference. Religion provided a language in which conquest could be recast as cosmic order. This did not mean everyone accepted Akkadian rule. Rebellions would haunt the dynasty. Cities with long memories of independence did not become passive because a royal inscription declared universal victory. But the appointment reveals the sophistication of Sargon's project. The empire was built through armies, yes, but also through priesthoods, households, marriage alliances, writing, and ceremony. Administration connected these worlds. Thousands of decisions had to be made below the level of kings: how much barley a worker received, which field supported a temple, where wool was delivered, who owed labor, and how supplies reached troops. Akkadian became increasingly important as a written administrative language alongside Sumerian. The cultural relationship was not a simple replacement. Sumerian remained prestigious, especially in religion and scholarship, long after it ceased to be widely spoken. Akkadian would become one of the ancient Near East's most consequential languages. Empire encouraged movement. Officials, merchants, laborers, captives, craftsmen, and soldiers crossed regions. Artistic styles traveled with them. Seals carved in the Akkadian period display scenes of exceptional dynamism: heroes struggling with lions and buffalo, gods standing amid flowing waters, bodies rendered with a new sense of movement and physical power. The dynasty projected an ideal of controlled energy. The king stood at the center, the gods sanctioned the order, officials transmitted commands, and resources flowed toward the capital. Yet no administrative system could remove the need for continual coercion. The next kings would learn how quickly an empire could turn against its rulers. The sons of Sargon. Sargon's reign was remembered as exceptionally long. When he died, perhaps around 2279 BCE under one commonly used chronology, the empire passed to his son Rimush. Succession was the moment when every dynasty was most vulnerable. The founder's aura could not be inherited automatically.
Governors, rival elites, and subject cities might test the new ruler before he secured the throne. Rimish faced widespread rebellion. His inscriptions describe campaigns against cities in Sumer and against enemies in the east.
As always, the numbers of dead and captured should not be read like modern audited statistics. They were declarations of overwhelming victory. Their repeated violence nevertheless reveals a central truth: Akkadian unity had to be remade by force. Rimish's reign appears to have been short. Later tradition claimed he was killed by members of his court, perhaps with stone objects because weapons were forbidden in the king's presence. The story cannot be verified, but it reflects the dangerous intimacy of palace politics. He was succeeded by his brother Manishtushu. Manishtushu campaigned beyond the Mesopotamian heartland and is associated with maritime expeditions toward the Gulf. A major stone monument known as the Manishtushu obelisk records purchases of land.
Its dense inscription opens a window onto elite property, witnesses, payments, and the royal household. The transactions have generated debate. Were they ordinary purchases, pressure disguised as sale, or part of a larger effort to consolidate crown land? The answer is uncertain. What is certain is that Akkadian power operated through property and institutions as well as through war. Manishtushu also died violently according to later tradition. Two rulers had preserved the empire, but neither achieved the legendary status of Sargon. The system survived succession crises and rebellions because the court still possessed the troops, resources, and administrative reach to reassert control. Then the throne passed to Naram-Sin, Sargon's grandson. His reign would bring the Akkadian imperial idea to its most dramatic expression. Naram-Sin, king of the four quarters. Naram-Sin inherited a powerful empire. He also inherited its enemies. Early in his reign, a coalition of rebellious cities challenged his authority. Later texts called this the Great Revolt. Kings arose in Kish and Uruk, and numerous cities joined the resistance. The scale of the rebellion suggests that Akkadian rule remained contested across the heartland itself. Naram-Sin defeated the coalition. The victory became foundational to his identity. If Sargon was remembered as the creator of empire, Naram-Sin presented himself as the ruler who overcame a world in rebellion. He adopted the title King of the Four Quarters, a claim not to a list of borders but to the totality of the world as Mesopotamians imagined it. Even more strikingly, he was deified during his lifetime. In inscriptions, the divine determinative, the sign placed before the names of gods, appeared before his name. This was an extraordinary transformation in royal ideology. Earlier Mesopotamian kings could enjoy close relationships with deities and could be honored after death. Naram-Sin's living divinity placed the king himself within the sacred order. The most famous image of his reign is the victory stele of Naram-Sin, now in the Louvre. It commemorates victory over a mountain people called the Lalubi. Earlier Mesopotamian monuments often arranged events in horizontal registers. On Naram-Sin's stele, the composition rises along the slope of a mountain. Akkadian soldiers advance in ordered ranks. Defeated enemies fall, plead, or flee. Above them, Naram-Sin stands larger than every other human figure. He wears a horned helmet, a sign associated with divinity. He carries bow and weapons. His body is idealized but active, stepping upward toward celestial symbols. The image tells a complete theory of empire without needing a long text. Order moves upward behind the king. Disorder collapses before him. The landscape itself becomes a stage for royal transcendence. Under Naram-Sin, Akkadian power reached its height. Campaigns are associated with northern Syria, the Taurus approaches, the Zagros highlands, and regions to the east. At Tel Brak in northeastern Syria, a major Akkadian administrative presence demonstrates direct imperial involvement far from the southern cities. The empire should not be imagined as a modern nation-state with uniformly controlled frontiers. Its authority varied. Some places were governed directly. Others paid tribute, hosted garrisons, accepted appointed officials, or entered alliances. Military routes and strategic centers mattered more than a continuous borderline. Long-distance exchange linked Mesopotamia with sources of timber, metals, and stone. Gulf networks connected traders with Dilmun, Magan, and lands farther east.
The Akkadian court benefited from circulation that had existed before the dynasty, but imperial power could protect, redirect, and profit from it.
Naram-Sin also negotiated.
A surviving treaty with an Elamite ruler written in Elamite shows that imperial politics involved diplomacy as well as conquest.
The Akkadian king's enemy would be the Elamite ruler's enemy, his friend, the ruler's friend.
The empire's achievements were real.
So were its costs.
Armies had to be supplied.
Officials and dependents had to be rewarded.
Subject populations owed labor and goods.
Campaigns that looked triumphant on stone could leave communities depleted.
A political system built around the king's success demanded repeated proof that the king remained successful.
Naram-Sin's divine kingship magnified victory.
It also magnified failure. Later Mesopotamian writers remembered his reign through a moral story called the Curse of Akkad.
In it, the gods become silent.
Naram-Sin, unable to obtain an answer, attacks the great temple of Enlil at Nippur.
The act brings catastrophe upon Akkad. The poem was composed later and should not be treated as a report of an actual sacrilege. Its importance lies elsewhere.
It shows how Mesopotamians explained imperial collapse. When a king overturned sacred order, political order collapsed with it.
History provides no single moment when the gods abandoned Akkad.
Instead, the evidence points toward a gathering crisis.
Life inside the imperial machine.
The Akkadian Empire is usually told through kings because kings commissioned monuments and inscriptions.
But empires are lived by ordinary people.
Most inhabitants worked close to the rhythms of land, water, animals, and household labor.
Farmers planted barley and maintained irrigation.
Date palms provided food and useful materials. Shepherds moved sheep and goats through pasture. Fishers worked rivers, canals, and marshes. Large institutions, palaces, temples, and elite households controlled land, workshops, and dependent labor. Workers received rations, often measured in barley, oil, or wool.
Administrative tablets record these lives with frustrating brevity: a name, an amount, a task, a delivery. The records make people visible and invisible at the same time. Women worked throughout the economy, particularly in textile production, one of Mesopotamia's great organized industries. Some women held property or high religious office. Others labored in dependent groups under close supervision. Status varied enormously. War also moved people by force. Captives could be resettled as laborers.
Entire communities might experience conquest not as a change on a map but as the loss of relatives, crops, livestock, and autonomy. At the upper levels, imperial administrators managed estates and communicated across distance.
Cylinder seals functioned as markers of identity and authority. Rolled over wet clay, they produced continuous scenes and secured containers, doors, and documents. Art from the Akkadian period often emphasizes physical power and divine presence. Yet even the most beautiful seal belonged to a working administrative system.
Its image was art, signature, security device, and statement of hierarchy at once.
The Akkadian state did not invent every institution it used. It expanded earlier Mesopotamian practices, repositioning them within a larger political network.
Local scribes continued to write.
Temples remained major economic and religious centers. City identities endured.
This combination was a source of strength. The empire could use existing institutions instead of rebuilding society from the ground up. It was also a weakness. Local traditions and elites provided ready-made centers of resistance whenever imperial control faltered.
Language offers the clearest example of Akkad's deeper legacy.
Akkadian, written in cuneiform, grew into a major language of government, scholarship, diplomacy, myth, and literature. Over time it developed distinct Babylonian and Assyrian forms. More than 1,000 years after Sargon, rulers and diplomats still wrote in the linguistic world his dynasty had helped elevate.
Sumerian did not disappear.
It remained a language of learning and ritual, studied by scribes much as later scholars studied prestigious languages no longer spoken in daily life. The empire therefore did not replace Sumer with Akkad. It helped create a blended Mesopotamian civilization in which Sumerian and Akkadian traditions became inseparable. At the center of this system stood Akkad itself, receiving tribute and projecting royal power. Later literature describes it as a city filled with abundance, storehouses, exotic goods, music, and splendor. Then the poem reverses the image. The city's joy becomes silence.
Its roads empty. Its wealth vanishes. Poetry compressed a long unraveling into a curse.
The real collapse began at the edges and then moved inward.
The gathering storm.
Naram-Sin was succeeded by his son Sharkali-Shari.
The title itself signals a change.
Naram-Sin had claimed the four quarters. Sharkali-Shari's name means king of all kings, but his inscriptions reveal a ruler fighting to preserve what remained. He faced threats on multiple fronts.
Elamite powers challenged Akkadian influence in the east. Amorite groups appeared along western regions.
The Gutians, peoples associated in Mesopotamian sources with the Zagros highlands, pressed into contested territory. Within the heartland, cities that had submitted under powerful kings could again pursue independence.
Later Mesopotamian texts turned the Gutians into archetypal destroyers, uncivilized outsiders who swept down from the mountains and overturned order. These accounts were written by their enemies and successors.
They are not impartial descriptions. The Gutians were probably not a single irresistible horde that erased the empire in one invasion. They may have entered Mesopotamia in groups, served as mercenaries, raided vulnerable routes, seized local power, and exploited political fragmentation. Sharkali-Shari claimed victories against several opponents. He also restored the temple of Enlil at Nippur, a fact that complicates the later story in which Naram-Sin's attack on that temple doomed the dynasty. His reign was not a simple freefall. The state still had armies, officials, and prestige. But the imperial center could no longer solve every crisis. At roughly the same broad period, parts of the Near East experienced increasing aridity associated with what researchers call the 4.2 kiloyear climatic event.
Evidence from sediments, settlement patterns, and agricultural zones has led some scholars to connect drought with disruption in northern Mesopotamia and with Akkad's decline. The climate explanation is compelling, but it must not become another simple myth. Climate evidence varies by place. Dating is imperfect. Human societies do not collapse automatically when rainfall declines.
Institutions adapt, populations move, trade shifts, and political choices matter. For an empire, however, environmental stress can multiply existing problems. Reduced rainfall in dry farming regions could diminish harvests. Pastoral groups might move in search of grazing. Rural populations could migrate toward better watered areas. Tax and tribute would become harder to collect. Grain prices and ration systems might come under pressure. Garrisons would become more expensive precisely when roads were less secure. In irrigated southern Mesopotamia, drought interacted with different vulnerabilities: river flow, canal maintenance, salinization, political conflict, and the immense coordination required to keep agricultural systems functioning.
Climate did not need to destroy Akkad directly.
It only needed to make every political and military problem harder at the same time.
The empire had been built by concentrating resources and authority. When communication failed or provincial loyalty weakened, concentration became fragility. A governor far from the capital might stop sending tribute. A city might decide that its own ruler offered better protection. A military commander might become a king. A trade route interrupted in one region could reduce supplies in another. Collapse, from the ground, rarely looks like a single event. It looks like messages that do not arrive. Rations issued late. Canals neglected. Caravans taking safer routes. Officials changing allegiance. Walls repaired in haste. Families leaving villages. Local rulers omitting the distant king's name. After Sharkali-Shari, the historical record becomes confused. The Sumerian king list captures the chaos with a famous question: who was king? Who was not king? The sentence may be literary, but it expresses political reality. The throne of universal monarchy had become something many men could claim and none could securely possess. The fall of Akkad. Following Shar-Kali-Shari's death, several shadowy rulers appear in the traditions of Akkad. Their reigns are difficult to reconstruct. Some may have controlled the capital or fragments of the old realm. Dudu and Shutura later restored a degree of authority, but the age of Sargon and Naram-Sin was over. The empire did not end on one universally agreed date. Depending on chronology and definition, historians place its effective collapse across the late 22nd century BCE. Nor did every region share the same experience. Some urban centers declined sharply. Others survived or recovered. Local dynasties returned. In southern Mesopotamia, rulers at Lagash, including the famous Gudea, oversaw substantial building programs and artistic production. Their achievements remind us that the fall of an empire is not the disappearance of civilization. Political fragmentation can redistribute power. The Gudeans established authority in parts of Mesopotamia, though the scale and coherence of their rule remain uncertain. Later Sumerian tradition blamed them for disorder. Eventually, Utu-Hegel of Urartu claimed to defeat the Gutian ruler Tiragan. Soon afterward, Ur-Nammu founded the third dynasty of Ur. The kings of Ur built another powerful territorial state. They borrowed from Akkadian imperial practices while presenting themselves within renewed Sumerian traditions. Administration became exceptionally elaborate. Kings again claimed wide dominion. Some were deified. In this sense, Akkad did not simply vanish. Its political form became part of Mesopotamia's repertoire. The physical city, however, slipped from view. Why has Akkad not been found? Its ruins may lie beneath a later settlement, deep alluvium, or a changed river course. The site may be known under another name but not recognized. Modern development or ancient reuse may have obscured it. Scholars continue to debate candidate locations. The mystery encourages dramatic claims, but absence is not supernatural. Mesopotamian cities were built largely of mud brick. When abandoned, their buildings eroded into low mounds. Later builders reused bricks. Rivers shifted. Names changed. What is remarkable is not that Akkad disappeared from the landscape. It is that its memory survived. Later rulers collected stories about Sargon and Naram-Sin. They copied inscriptions, studied old monuments, and reshaped the kings into heroes and warnings. Sargon became the ideal conqueror who rose from obscurity. Naram-Sin became both a divine victor and the proud ruler whose mistakes brought ruin. The historical men disappeared behind exemplary lives. Empires that came later, Babylonian, Assyrian, Persian, operated on far greater scales and developed different institutions. None was merely a continuation of Akkad. Yet the Akkadian dynasty established a durable political imagination. The ruler of one city could claim authority beyond traditional borders, command diverse peoples, and describe that rule as universal. The first empire became a template. What really destroyed the empire? So what destroyed the Akkadian Empire? The honest answer is that no single cause can be proven sufficient. The Gudeans mattered, but hostile later accounts magnified them into agents of total chaos. Internal rebellions mattered, but the dynasty had defeated enormous rebellions before. Drought may have intensified hardship, but climate affected regions unevenly and did not dictate one political outcome. The most convincing explanation is convergence. First, the empire faced a structural problem of scale. Communications moved at the speed of feet, pack animals, boats, and signals. A ruler could send commands across great distances, but information arrived slowly and local officials possessed considerable practical power. Second, the empire depended on successful extraction. Grain, labor, animals, metals, and prestige moved through its networks. If harvests weakened or routes became unsafe, the center had fewer resources with which to solve the crisis. Third, repeated succession struggles and rebellions exposed the limits of dynastic legitimacy. Sargon's family claimed divine favor and universal power, but city identities remained strong. Imperial rule had not erased the political landscape beneath it. Fourth, frontier pressure forced the court to fight in several directions. The empire could survive one campaign.
It struggled when every frontier and province demanded attention. Finally, environmental change may have acted as a threat multiplier, reducing agricultural security, encouraging migration, and intensifying competition.
No single horseman rode into Akkad and ended an age.
The system lost resilience. The imperial image presented the king as the point where every line of order converged. That image was magnificent when the center held. When it did not, there were too few independent supports to prevent fragmentation. This is why the curse of Akkad remains so powerful even though it is not literal history.
The poem understood collapse as a failure of relationship between king and god, city and countryside, abundance and obligation. Its language of divine anger expressed a human recognition: power is never held by force alone.
It depends on belief, cooperation, predictable exchange, and the expectation that tomorrow's order will resemble today's. When that expectation disappears, an empire can unravel with astonishing speed. The empire that outlived its capital. Sargon could not have known that his name would be copied for thousands of years. He emerged from a world of competing cities and forged a dynasty that claimed the horizon. His daughter Enheduanna joined royal authority to sacred literature. His successors learned that empire had to be reconquered with every crisis. Naram-Sin transformed kingship into a vision of divine, universal power. Then the world they built fragmented. Akkad's fall did not erase its achievements, nor should those achievements conceal its violence. The empire created connections while demanding submission.
It encouraged cultural synthesis while concentrating wealth and authority.
It made possible new scales of administration and new scales of warfare. Its rulers called themselves kings of the four quarters. Their actual control was never universal. But the claim changed history. After Akkad, Mesopotamian rulers knew that the independent city was not the largest political world imaginable. A king could govern many cities, many languages, many landscapes. He could turn roads, temples, grain, diplomacy, art, and terror into a single imperial argument. Every later empire would confront the same contradiction.
The farther power travels, the more impressive it appears, and the more fragile its connections become.
Today, Akkad itself remains lost. Somewhere beneath the soil of Iraq, perhaps, lie the foundations of palaces, temples, workshops, and homes that once stood at the center of the known world.
Until the city is found, its absence leaves us with an image worthy of its history.
An empire that taught kings to imagine universal rule. And a capital swallowed by the land it once commanded.